the MCU and why Marvel guys are just like rolling around in giant piles of money over there is because these are really fun movies.
Absolutely.
And like the comedic aspects of these films, just like I can't really think about or think of a lot of moments that are meant to be comedic in the MCU that for me just like completely don't work. And in this movie, one of my favorites is when he's talking to Wong in the library when he first meets him, and like the one names just keep coming and he doesn't stop. Like that made me crack up so much.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and I think that's one thing that like I don't want to get onto a whole. I don't think it'd be very fruitful to get onto a whole diatribe about like Marvel versus DC. But I think
I've done that enough already on this podcast. We don't need to do
that. but I think that the humor that has been infused into all of these, I think is crucial to the sort of lightheartedness. Because when you actively infuse a certain degree of believable humor into your narrative and into your characters, as a creative, it automatically keeps you at a certain playing field. It keeps you at a certain place to where you don't go too far down the other path. You don't go too far to where you're distancing your audience with darkness or anything. And that's one of the things that I love about it. And when you have humor in your material, then it's easier for the audience, or I found it to be easier for the audience to integrate when you get heavier. When you start to get a little bit more complex, or you start to get into something that's a little bit weightier thematically, if you had that humor to kind of offset it, then your audience will go there with you more readily. When you just sort of lead with it, when you just sort of come out the gate with it, then that's why certain films can be a bit distancing, I believe. And it all just depends, because genres have their own conventions, and there's some genres in which it works well. But I think for specifically the superhero subset of the action fantasy genre, then that you do need a little bit of levity introduced into everything, or you're going to fall flat. Your audience is not going to go with you into that much pressure,
And again, like, we are talking about stuff that's based on superhero comic books, so there is a very, very large, amount of just inherent silliness to the source material that needs just to be embraced.
Absolutely.
Now, and speaking of like the stuff that's fun and the connections here, I really enjoyed having or rewatching this movie after having recently seen Thor Ragnarok and recognizing the atrium of the New York Sanctum there. It's the same set. Like, it is the same physical space. And I thought that was really, really cool. And I enjoyed the heck out of that.
Very much so.
Because even now in the comic books, you have different artists rendering of different environments, and like, no two people are going to draw the X mansion the same way. Like, you're not going to like see characters having a conversation walking down a hallway and know, oh, hey, look, they're walking by Kitty Pryde's rooms. Like that, that doesn't happen in the comic books. But I think something really, fun here in the movies that you can do when you're, using the same locations for different shots. You get that really tangible sense of the space there, and that you're revisiting these same locations again. It's a lot of fun.
Right, and that's part of what helps the films be so propulsive, and what helps substantiate when they when they need to sort of bring a team together, or they need to have a shared moment like that. The fact that they've done so much like tagging in, if you want to call it that, helps that it keeps it from being too jarring for the audience,
right?
Because the audience, if they don't immediately recognize, like, hey, where have I seen that before? There'll be a sort of subconscious connection to like, oh yeah, I thought that looked familiar. That was cool. And then like we've already talked about, it can be fun to go back, and when you revisit the films or when you explore them later after you've seen them for the first time, you can make those different connections, and it just substantiates the whole universe better.
Yeah. So speaking of points of connection with the comic, and like, I think we're like rambling about this way more than I usually do, and that's okay. It's kind of fun, but
it's my fault. I'm sorry.
No, it's definitely not, because anyway, it doesn't matter. Speaking of points of connection with the comics, I was 100% sure, and I was sad to have been spoiled about this just a little bit. I was 100% sure that the Infinity Stone that we were going to see in this movie was going to be the Soul Stone, and that's what was going to be in the Orb of Agamotto. Because in the comics, the property of the Eye of Agamotto is that it sees through illusions and it sees through to the truth of things. And that seems to me like that's a very logical. If you're gonna introduce the Soul Stone somehow, it makes sense that you would put it into an artifact that like sees into the heart of things and sees the truth of stuff.
Right.
And so like I thought, that would be really cool. I'm not disappointed that it ended up going the way that it did. It just makes me wonder like, where is the Soul Stone going to come from? Obviously, I'm pretty sure it's going to come up here in Infinity War, and we'll finally get that answer.
Right.
But an infinite time loop, I think, is a pretty cool way for a mere mortal person to actually like effectively be able to combat a vastly powerful mystical force.
Right. Well, and it's interesting. So a couple of things. Brief hit and run. I am, at least at present, an adopter that in the MCU, I think the Soul Stone is in Wakanda. I'm just gonna leave it there.
Okay. I haven't actually seen Black Panther yet, so
okay.
Yeah.
So I will just leave it there.
Okay.
And I did not come up with that theory, but I read a couple of theories and it makes very good sense. So
okay.
I'll leave that there. But yeah, that's one thing that I think I appreciated that they used the time loop phenomenon, because here's one thing: if you're talking about expanding universal perspective, right? Mm-hmm. Well, you're dealing with two things. You're dealing with space and you're dealing with time. And so they dealt with space so many times throughout the film, of dealing with bending space, rolling space, buildings converging in on themselves, sort of spatial anomalies in some, and I don't think we've said it yet explicitly on the show, but one of the most visually arresting and interesting films in the entire Marvel canon.
And I just need to put this in here right now because it's fitting. I really, really think that this movie was robbed of the visual effects Oscar.
I agree.
Like there's like the rewinding time sequence in Hong Kong alone should have clinched that deal.
Man,
and I furthermore really resent Suicide Squad having won any Oscars at all, because that movie just didn't even have any business in the building that night. So
I tweeted out after the Oscars. I said, Martin Scorsese's Silence does not have an Oscar. Suicide Squad has one Oscar.
Yeah.
I don't understand how that. I mean, whatever your feelings are about
what is the
Scorsese's
world coming
film,
to?
I'm like, yeah, like we're clearly backwards. We're clearly backwards on something. But granted, people are like, oh, it's for a technical award and that makeup was great. Yeah, on one character, leave it alone.
Yeah,
like,
it was.
Grief.
It really was just the one character. It was all about Enchantress's makeup effects at the end of the movie for like 5 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway,
so super ridiculous. But yes. So getting back to the time element of it, I appreciate how, to me, for a film that is an origin story coming in sort of late in the game to an already existing and an extremely extensive universe, I appreciate how kind of complete it is in itself. So obviously it tendrils out to other places, as we've already alluded to, but it is very whole in and of itself, and I think it would have been incomplete if they didn't integrate the time capabilities into its narrative. And I love even more so that's actually what solves the ultimate conflict. And so yeah, I appreciate that. I'm a sci-fi nut, so I love stories about time travel and stories that integrate time travel paradoxes and sort of exploring that. So I really geeked out on that almost more so than I did the actual sort of bending of space and bending of the buildings and you know, dancing around on worlds.
And that was really cool. There was a lot of that didn't really make sense to me in terms of like, what is this for? It looks really cool and it's fantastic. It looks great. and I appreciate that. But what's it for? And when you're dealing with magic, one of the most important things, like in fantasy literature, like if you're going to do magic, your magic system needs to be robust, and like you need
Absolutely.
to know what the rules of magic are. And the reason you need to know what the rules of magic are is so that it can be really, really cool when the characters are super clever about dancing around those rules.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think this film does a really I mean, it's got the weight of the world on it in terms of explaining to you what they're able to do. And I think it's really impressive.
Well, and for me, if this film has a shortcoming, I think it's in that a little bit, that they don't ever really explain like what they can do. It's very, very open, and it sort of leaves it open to just be whatever the story needs it to be. And, obviously that's a handy tool for any writer to have, but it's a little bit less satisfying on the part of the end user. Not that the Marvel universe in the comics has been especially good at portraying magic in a consistent or cohesive way at all.
Sure.
But and just I just read the other day, and this is gonna come out in a pretty timely fashion. This may be something that even a lot of our listeners don't even know yet. There's like Doctor Strange has a miniseries out right now. I think we're just through issue 3, and he has become a Ghost Rider.
Oh, are you serious?
Yeah.
Wow, I'm not caught up with that. That's killer.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. And there's this stuff is going on with Mephisto, and like actually a bunch of the Avengers are Ghost Riders right now, kind of like under the thrall of Mephisto in Las Vegas, I think. Yeah, like there was some like
of
giant.
Course they are.
There was some giant cataclysmic thing that happened in one of the other events. That basically caused Las Vegas to like be drug into hell, and so Doctor Strange like basically went to do battle with Mephisto for the fate of Las Vegas, and it didn't quite go his way, and and so now like a bunch of the Avengers who were there are all Ghost Riders, and like they're trying to figure out now how are we going to face all of these like now mystically empowered Avengers on top of all their other abilities, and Doctor Strange as a Ghost Rider is even more crazy. So anyway, that's a tangent.
That sounds like such a I'm gonna seek this out now. I am literally looking up right now like, oh man, I have got to get that miniseries.
The miniseries is called Doctor Strange Damnation.
Okay, all right, I'll look that up. Oh man, that is great.
Yeah. There were a couple of things that just kind of took me out of the movie. I didn't really buy that like 5 minutes after his emergency surgery to not die, he's like up and running around.
I see. Yeah, I understand. And that's one thing that you can kind of lean on his like whatever qualitative abilities he'd learned from in the mystical arts at that point.
Yeah.
But it is still a bit of a stretch. Like, oh yeah, I was literally at the verge of dying. I needed immediate medical attention, and then oh nope, I'm good. Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm sewed back up.
Yeah. And
I agree with that.
And in terms of like the fight at the Sanctum when he traps Caecilius's followers behind the sliding doors or whatever you call those.
Right.
And that's a great. I love that idea in a fight. But like, do they not have sling rings? I feel like they did.
Yeah, and I see what you're saying there. Now, the only what I thought was that somehow they had lost them in the battle, and that's the only way that he could have. But I didn't see that happen. I didn't notice that. I was specifically watching because I had something in the recesses of my brain about like how did he trap them there? But
right.
That's the only explanation that I have, and you could definitely ding the film for not necessarily making that very plain, very clear. Yeah.
So there's one other thing that I kind of I'd like your perspective on, and maybe you can like answer this question for me because it's not necessarily a gripe that I have, but it's a question